Mary Craver, 307 West Columbia, and Jennifer Sazy of 709 Hillwood Avenue provided information about the impact of the July 8 flood. Dan Lehman provided photos of the July 8 flood. Heaney Winters of 324 Grove Avenue wrote about issues with parking access. James and Ann Craig wrote to request additional generator noise regulation. John Tepperman wrote about requiring electric vehicle chargers at gas stations. Ellen wrote about regulation of idling vehicles. And Kathy Washa of 701 Poplar Drive wrote about stormwater management issues and the July 8th flood. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We're now going to move on to the receipt of public comment. At the present, I've got 4 speaker slips. If you wish to speak, I'd ask you to fill out a speaker slip in the room outside the chambers. When you get to the podium, please state your name and address for the record and keep your comments to 3 minutes. Our first speaker is Ron Kruntz. Did I pronounce that correctly? I'm sorry. Welcome.
As I said last time, I've been called worse.
All right.
What you call me, so I'm content with whatever it is you call me.
All right.
My name is Ron Kranz. And
Okay.
I'm at 6275 Carrydale Drive, Springfield, Virginia. And the last time that I was here, I made a comparison to the work that's being done at 900 South Washington Street to a Holocaust. And Councilman Snyder offered a very stirring rebuttal. In fact, it had me on the edge of my seat, citing the bravery of his father as a liberator in Nazi Germany. He also mentioned longtime Falls Church resident Fran Richardson of the Red Cross, who interviewed the doctors after they had gone down the line of survivors of the recently emancipated Jews. At that point, Mr. Snyder concluded that whatever is going on in Falls Church, it's not a Holocaust. Well, the glaring defect in that rebuttal, of course, is that we cannot interview the survivors of abortions. That's by design. But allow me to tell you what is going on at South Washington Street. According to the Virginia Department of Health, between 2015 and 2017, 6,311 people were killed there. To put that in context, that's twice the amount of young children that we have in the public school system in Falls Church. Not only that, it constitutes, to further contextualize that, that's 45% of the entire population of Falls Church. And so this begs a question. Would it bother us more if they were using guns? Perhaps if they were using a gas chamber or killing 50-somethings or 60 or 70-somethings, would that bother us more? Would we call that a Holocaust? Of note, per capita, affluent Falls Church has more abortions than any provider in Virginia. That's per capita. As I had mentioned, we're unable to interview the survivors of our death camp, but God can, and He certainly will, and then He will interview us with these prevailing words. And as much as you've not done for the least of these, you've not done for me. And then He will treat us in the way that we have treated our preborn neighbors. Before that dreadful day, turn away from this. Let's wash our hands of this blood guilt. Turn in repentance to the head of all principality and power, Jesus Christ. It's those words that my friend Matt had read the last time we were here that still prevail. Deliver those who are being taken away to death and those who are staggering to slaughter. Who could that apply to more than an unborn child going against their will, being taken to the slaughter? Who would that apply more to? And then he concludes with these, and I'll conclude. Does He not know who keeps your soul? And will He not render to each one according to their works? See, friends, one is too many. But 60 million has proven to be not enough to satiate the bloodlust of our opulent country. There's only one right response. It's to abolish human abortion.
All right, that beep means your time is up.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
kind attention.
Our next speaker is Al Washa, followed by Jeffrey Cohen. Mr. Washa, welcome.
Thank you. This is my first city council meeting ever. I'm very happy to be here. I didn't do very well with parliamentary procedure in school, which kept me away from events like this. I did speak last week about the stormwater drainage issue, and I felt compelled to come back here tonight just to perhaps let you know that you will see more and more of me. I really, truly hope that we get results. It's not our basement. It is indeed the environment and the weather, but more to our point, it's a city issue. The inlets on the street behind us, up the hill, I've come to learn that inlet heights have to be 6 inches, and this is 2.5 inches, and it just gets completely overwhelmed. And there are issues with the height of the street level because of repeated repavings, and there's no place for the water to go except for down the hill, and it inundates our property. It's a torrent of water. And we've been, this happened when we first moved in 15 years ago, and our next door neighbor has had the issue since they moved in 18 years ago. And we've reported it time and time again. And this situation occurs even when there's not a 100-year storm or even a 10-year storm. It happens every year. And so I truly want action on the city's part. We have videos and photographs. We have sent them to the council, but we would be more than happy to share again. So we will follow up. We respect the response by Alan Dalton. He's been very, very responsible, and Dave Snyder came over to look at our issue as well. And they both took copious notes. So we feel we're in a good place, but that feeling could collapse, in a month, in 2 months, or when the next storm is, and the situation has not been dealt with. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the city manager, during his report, I think will also provide some additional information, so you may want to stick around just for a couple minutes. Our next speaker is Jeffrey Cohen. Is it Cowan or Cohen? I'm sorry.
Cowan.
I'm sorry.
Hope that's working. Okay, I've lived in the area for about 15 years, always near Thomas Jefferson Elementary School, where I have 2 daughters that attend that school. And I thought I knew the area very well and the rhythm of it, having my kids walk to school and walking my dog past it and driving past it on a regular basis. But very recently, I got a ticket for passing a park school bus there, and I would usually, a couple times when I've been to city council meetings, I've seen police officers here. Maybe I would like to ask somebody to give it a second look, because I think maybe the equipment might not have been working correctly, or maybe it was, and I really did do something, but I don't think I violated the purpose of the law, maybe the letter of the law. But anyways, I think the time was really unusual. It was Thursday, July 25th at 12:54 p.m. in front of TJ School. That's not a time when you really expect kids to be getting on and off a school bus. I did see, the bus was clearly parked there and had the stop sign flipped open. But as I approached it, I did not see any school kids. It was the middle of the day, the middle of summer. I wasn't expecting that. I went on my way thinking, well, maybe the driver went in and they were doing some training exercise or something. But lo and behold, I got a $250 ticket a couple days ago in the mail, much to my surprise. So, and I know that the purpose of the law, I looked it up. I was curious as a lawyer. It's to protect students getting on and off the bus. And arguably, if there's no students around, you would think that's an error if you wait a reasonable time and move on. So anyways, I could maybe give the information to Wyatt or somebody else. And if I could ask you to maybe have a police officer give it a fresh look and maybe consider maybe the equipment wasn't working right that time of the day. Maybe it was. Maybe there's some other logical explanation I'm overlooking, but.
Sure, maybe the city manager could connect an officer with you, and you all could have an additional conversation about
Okay,
it.
okay, got my number. Okay.
All right, our last speaker is Matt Velo. Is that how you pronounce it? Okay, sorry.
My name is Matt Vayu. Address is 87 Haiti Street, Warrenton, Virginia. I come to you guys again. Me and my brother Ron were here a couple months ago now. Wanted to come to you again to remind you of your obligation to intercede for those being taken away to slaughter in the city of Falls Church. Children are still being murdered at 900 South Washington Street and also through other abortifacients sold in the city. And we will keep coming back here until abortion is actually abolished in this city. I'm really not asking you to create any new laws. I'm simply asking you to be consistent with the laws against murder, regardless of the victim's size, their location, their degree of dependency. We just cannot ignore this Holocaust simply because the victims don't have a voice. Our culture tries to say there is peace, but there is no peace. And history will not look back kindly on people who participate or support this type of heinous act. So I urge you all to action tonight. The soil of Falls Church is stained with the blood of those murdered there. And God says that the shed blood of innocent humans cries out for justice, and they will have their day in court. And so that's why I'm here to warn you that something must be done. So I urge you to take action, use your God-given authority to end abortion now. Shut down any abortion providers and prohibit the sale of abortifacients. And we will support you in that endeavor. May God grant you all true peace and repentance. Thank you.
All right, that's the last speaker we have. Let's move on now to council requests. Are there any council requests? Mr. Duncan, do you have something? I don't. Okay. All right, let's move on to the report of the city manager. Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. I did want to provide the council a briefing on the flooding from on July 8th. The council did have a work session right after that flood and had a staff briefing. And since that time, I just wanted to give council an update and also report on the town hall meeting that we had that was referred to a little bit earlier tonight. As the council knows, July 8th did see an extreme rain event for the region. We had over 5 inches of rain fall in a very short period of time here in the city, and it caused flooding virtually everywhere in the city. All of our bridges, except those on Route 29, were overtopped. Roads were closed throughout the city. Property was damaged across the city. Our town hall meeting was partly just to report out on the damage that we had, but also to listen to the community in terms of what experiences were, what requests for information were, and also to discuss our plan of action going forward. We reported on the watershed management plan, which is where we identify our stormwater priorities in the city right now. Over the past several years since the stormwater utility was created, we've carried out $4.2 million in projects to either detain stormwater in the city or to expand our stream channel and lower in the floodplain. We've also conducted extensive system maintenance, removed on average about 136 tons of debris from the system on an annual basis, carried out spot repairs and storm system relining. Since the July 8th flood itself, we've done maintenance on the system to repair damage that occurred during the flood. We've cleaned the whole system and repaired several drop inlets that were destroyed, as well as repaved some of our bridges that were eroded out. We also have damage to the storm channel where the walls to the streams were eroded out and destroyed. And those are in the process of being fixed, and we expect will be fixed in the coming weeks. We've also met with homeowners across the city, either one by one with homeowners or street by street, to discuss what happened and make sure we understand what they experienced. Going forward, the action that we need to take, there's things we're doing right now just through the operating budget to respond to things that we can fix within our existing resources. And then in terms of our larger projects, we want to renew and update our watershed management plan and reprioritize our projects. The watershed management plan can be found on the city website. Section 5 is where the prioritized list is kept. Our organizing principle for updating the plan will be to target those areas that are experiencing repeated flooding. in doing that, we don't want to displace flooding from one area and move it to another area. That is sort of the complexity of hydrology. You have to look at the system holistically, and when you solve problems, try not to create new problems downstream. We also have to recognize that the projects that we do through the watershed management plan may not solve for extreme events like we experienced on July 8th. But what we really do want to do is decrease those areas where we're having frequent flooding, like you heard from Mr. Washer earlier tonight. And we have a lot of those look across the city, and so we need to prioritize them and have a plan to do those in a sustained manner over time. Some of the takeaways from Wednesday's town hall: we had a lot of sort of granular questions, and we're following up with homeowners on specific questions that might be specific to their situation on their street. But more broadly, some of the questions we got were, could the city provide some guidance for people as they're thinking about protection at their own home? For instance, having a one-pager on backflow devices, what people need to think about if they're considering doing that. So we're putting that together, and we'll get that out this week. In addition, things that people can do to make their own property more resilient, provide overland relief for flooding on their property if it's recurring. The watershed management plan update, we will come to council in September with a proposed charter for a task force to oversee that effort. We had a task force when we created the first watershed management plan in 2012. We think it is helpful to have citizens involved in that, working side by side with city staff, as well as engineering, consulting services to help us work through a prioritized list. We're interviewing the engineering firms right now, and I think by the end of this month we'll have a contract for council for council action in September to get that work underway. The goal would be to identify projects, prioritize them, and then have a discussion on funding them in time for the budget adoption next March. The current watershed management plan is available on the city's webpage. If you just go to the home page for the city website, you'll be able to find the watershed management plan there to see what the priorities are right now and what's been accomplished over the past 4 years. With respect to sanitary sewer inflow and infiltration, the key issue is how do we keep water out of the sanitary collection system? It gets in there through a variety of means, through cracks in older pipes. It also comes in through private laterals and through foundation drains and area drains. So some of the policy questions are, what have we done to protect the sewer mains? The city is, over the past 15 years, has relined about 50% of the entire sewer collection system. And in many of our worst areas where we have inflow and infiltration, those are the areas that we targeted first for relining. So we need to, we think, look beyond just the mains and engage with property owners where we think a lot of the water is coming in. This is not easy to do. If you have a 1950s era house with an old sewer lateral, it may cost $4,000 to $10,000 to repair or replace that sewer lateral. What are things that the city could do to incentivize homeowners to take on that task? Because that's where a lot of the stormwater is coming into our sanitary sewer system. We may have some illicit connections also from area drains or foundation drains. We need to identify those and disconnect those. We've got decent data on that, but we need to get more data on where those are and work with homeowners to see if we can incentivize those fixes on the private side as well. In addition, for backflow devices, I think a policy question that we are looking at right now, and we'll have some recommendations to council in September. There are other localities that provide a cost share or an incentive to help owners with backflow devices in targeted areas where backflow might be recurring. We're looking at those experiences. Alexandria is an example where they have a program like that. We want to look at it here and see if that's a viable option. The bottom line for sanitary sewer backflows is those are an extreme burden on homeowners, and we want to prevent them from occurring. Lastly, I just want to report there is we are working with the state and federal government for assistance for homeowners. There will be an outreach at the Pemmit Hill Library on the week of August 13th through August 19th. We've got information on that with handouts, but people can go to Pemmit Hill Library and meet with state and federal and local officials just to discuss what's available through the Small Business Assistance Administration for assistance for homeowners. The eligibility criteria are high, and I don't think we're going to have a lot of property owners that will be able to take advantage of that program, but we are getting information out it just so people are aware of it. That's just a quick report on the town hall meeting, actions that we're taking now, and follow-up that we'll have over the coming weeks. I'd be happy to answer any questions about that.
All right, any questions, comments? Mr. Duncan?
Just one question, I guess, for Mr. Wash's situation. I know we don't want to get into too much detail about a specific case, but is there anything can be done in the very quick, short run to address, the narrowing of the throat of the runoff basins that are on that street or any other street? I mean, if a street has been paved over several times and the space has been reduced from what the original design was, is that something we have to wait and put on a stormwater management plan, or is the cost of that something that falls into your category of things that we can do with resources that we have available?
The things that you just described would be in the operating budget, so those are things that don't need to wait for the larger plan, and we're assessing those right now. And so we'll follow up with the homeowners in that neighborhood about what we'll do immediately, and then the longer-term process for heavier solutions.
Okay, good. My second question, you referred to the, whatever we're calling it, the Blue Ribbon Panel or whatever. A couple of citizens have written to us expressing interest in serving on that. Is there going to be some sort of a advertisement or a selection? I can't remember how we staffed the last 2012 Blue Ribbon Panel. Is there a process for that?
So we want to get the charter drawn up so people understand what the work of that group will be, so they understand what they're signing up for. And then council will take a look at that, take action on that in September. And then I think we would advertise it, and we'd run through the process that we have through the appointments committee. I can give you the example of what that group looked like the last time. It was a pretty big task force, and that effort took 2 years of work. We want this to be more concentrated and more focused, and we'll draw the charter of this organization accordingly.
Okay, so if anybody's interested in serving on the panel, just stand by, wait until we get the charter documents, basically a September activity.
That's right.
Okay, I'm sorry, I thought of one other thing. I thought the meeting last Wednesday was very productive, and I commend staff for all that you've done to prepare for it, and citizens commend them for coming with very substantive and dispassionate explanations, which was kind of remarkable for folks who ended up with water or sewage in their basements. It was really a good example of a community trying, I think, to pull together to deal with something that hopefully is a freakish occurrence, although it seems to happen now every summer. But one thing that I did hear that was disturbing and not really responded to, I think, directly, was the situation with the Broadway. It was described as putting so much water out onto the street that there was flooding up to the first residential level of the Broadway. At least that's what I understood to be said. And that, I saw the pictures. I understand there was a large backup of water in front of the Broadway, but it's just inconceivable to me that the water could have gotten high enough to have actually gotten into the first residential level. But your response more broadly to new development is, you know, what we all know, which is that the standards that we set for new development are supposed to, you know, not only maintain the current conditions, but improve them. The Broadway is one of our older new developments, so perhaps it wasn't built to the same standard. But was there anything in that particular statement that prompted you to think, you know, gee, there's something we could do in that section of Broad Street that would address the Broadway's particular concerns?
I'll need to go back to check and see what was required for the Broadway. You do need to remember that the Broadway site was an entire wall-to-wall paved site with 0 stormwater controls when it was redeveloped.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Broadway certainly didn't make that situation worse. And I just need to go back and see what exactly was done for stormwater detention with
That's
the
true.
Broadway.
They could have maintained the current conditions, and
Yeah.
it could
But
still be performing as it does now.
I
That's
do,
true.
I do recall that we had stormwater detention as part of the Spectrum and the Byron.
For sure.
Detention and stormwater treatment to reduce pollution. The Broadway was, that approval was right before my time here, so I'd have to go and check the records on that. The larger point that was made with that comment that our infrastructure is sized for, you know, most of it was built in the 1950s, and A, it's getting old, and B, a lot has happened since then. And the climate is becoming more extreme. And so that is why we have a stormwater utility, and that's why we're having this larger conversation about getting our infrastructure where it needs to be for current conditions. And it's going to have to be a combination of some stormwater detention, redevelopment, making things better and not worse. It's going to have to be private homeowners doing things on their own property to be more resilient, as well as expanding capacity in the system. But bigger pipes alone is definitely not the solution. It needs to be a mix of all those things.
Okay, well, like I say, I thought the discussion was good, and we're off to a good start at trying to tackle a difficult problem. If the Broadway in particular, you know, is performing as was described or anything near it, I think we ought to try to have a conversation with the folks in the Broadway to see if there's anything that can be done to,
Yeah.
you know, improve the capture of the rain that falls on the roof before it gets down into our system. I don't know what that would be, don't know what engineering would tell us, but that's, you know, obviously a big development with, you know, dozens of units, and if there's something that, you know, they can undertake in cooperation with us, then that would be time and resources well spent. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, one of the things that impressed me in the town hall, in addition to everything Phil said, and I do want to support taking a look specifically at the Laura Drive Poplar area and what we can do rapidly to deal with that. Certainly that one intake is very narrow compared to what you see elsewhere, so I think that's critical. Was the number of repetitive circumstances that were presented. So I'm hoping that we can prioritize those and we can look at what the capital expenditure would be and put that out to folks. I think we ought to do what we can in existing funding, and then I think we ought to look at what are the ramifications for a capital project that to really address these repetitive situations as well as do the other things that you were talking about. I had one other inquiry regarding something else. There was a request from James Thurber Court, and I'd appreciate you take a look at that. The citizens there are interested in working with the city to put their own resources along with the cities for a pocket park. So if you could take a look at that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, other comments? I agree. I think the town hall, I would commend staff and the community for a lively and civil discussion. I know it's a very I had some flooding as well in my house and my basement as well, so I'm very familiar with some of the issues. But I do think we have a constructive dialogue that's ongoing right now. And I do look forward, though, to finding ways to accelerate solutions so that it's, talk is cold comfort when you got 6 inches of sewage in your basement. So, but I think we're headed in the right direction. I appreciate everyone's cooperation and willingness to work together to find solutions as rapidly as possible. So, thank you. Anything else? Any other council comments? Vice Mayor Connolly?
I just wanted to respond to Mr. Cron's, Mr. Vayu, sorry. And I just checked with the city attorney. And I appreciate your impassioned words and your love of life. And as a city government body, that's not something that we can regulate. It's a statewide concern, and it's not a business that we are able to regulate. So while I appreciate you coming to us, it needs to be a statewide conversation.
All right, so I think we're at a council request and time to move on to business on the agenda. Madam Clerk, will you call the first item, please?
Yes, we have TR 19-21, resolution to amend the 2005 comprehensive plan to update and replace Chapter 10 Housing with Housing a Complete Community Housing Chapter of the city's comprehensive plan.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shields.
Well, thank you, council. We are pleased to bring both the housing chapter and the demographics chapter to council. I think what we could do is provide the staff report for both chapters and have the public hearing on both. But we would need a separate motion and a separate vote for each chapter. And the two have gone through the process together. The two do help inform each other. And a lot of really great community work and staff work, I think, has brought these two comp plan chapters together. I'm looking at the city clerk. She might not be happy with me trying to join these two. Oh, the city attorney's taking it away from me.
Oh, I don't have I think that we should announce the other item before we begin if we're going to do
All
the
right.
hearing together, but I think we can
Let's-
work with that.
Let's announce the other item then.
The other item is TR 19-20, resolution to amend the 2005 comprehensive plan to update and replace Chapter 2, Demographics, with People, Housing and Jobs, Demographics Chapter of the city's comprehensive plan.
All right, thank you.
And Shana Schaefer will give our staff report, and she's been our staff lead on this as it's taken through the process. So thank you, Shana.
Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Tarter, members of council. Before you tonight for public hearing and final action are both updates to the housing and demographic chapter of the city's comprehensive plan. And so I just wanted to highlight a few things on both of the staff reports. First, beginning with the housing chapter, the request again is for council to hold a public hearing and consider adoption of TR 19-21, a resolution to update the city's existing housing chapter, and staff recommends that council adopt TR 19-21. Council last saw the draft chapter at a July 15th, 2019 joint work session with the Planning Commission, and there are a few changes that occurred to the housing chapter as part of that meeting. First, on page 2, the definition of AMI was revised to enhance clarity. On page 9, an acknowledgement was added that a commitment to affordable housing is a community-wide commitment. Under the evaluation of housing needs section, a sentence was added noting that allowing accessory dwelling units may be another solution for the city to consider to meet its affordable housing needs. And then under the implementation section, strategy number 9, which talks about different groups that the city may partner with to bring more affordable housing to the city, faith groups was also added as another group for the city to work with, and that's a best practice that other jurisdictions have been using. All new texts since the July 15th joint work session are shown in red in the draft chapter. That is attachment 1. On August 5th of 2019, the Planning Commission held a public hearing to consider the updates to the housing chapter of the comprehensive plan. And as part of that meeting, there were no further changes made to the chapter, and the Planning Commission voted unanimously in favor of the updated materials. So just touching on the importance of planning for housing of course, is tied to many aspects of community life, including transportation, economic development, education, healthcare, and the environment. And so it's important that the city plan for housing to support attractive neighborhoods, historic districts, and a wide range of housing types that will help to support the city's local economy and community. The scope of work for the draft chapter includes a new vision for housing. This is intended to build upon the city's 2040 vision, which was adopted by council in 2017. And the chapter also includes a number of strategies and actions which lay out a rough implementation plan for the chapter. That implementation plan is intended to be general, a guiding framework that can be taken to achieve the city's vision for housing, but it's intended to allow for some flexibility. And so the vision for this chapter is included on lines 81 through 84 of the staff report. So just briefly going to read that off. It's to create and maintain a diverse supply of housing that supports an inclusive and welcoming community. As the region continues to grow, work proactively to ensure affordable housing keeps pace with population increases and is available for a range of incomes, household sizes, generation, and needs. And then there are 9 strategies that drop out of that vision statement, and it includes such things as incentivizing the maintenance and provision of more workforce, moderate and low-income housing, supporting aging in place, reviewing and revising the city's development regulations, continuing to promote fair access to housing, monitoring local and regional and local housing markets to identify pressures and opportunities, and then partnering with other organizations such as the city's neighboring jurisdictions, nonprofits, faith groups, and regional agencies to bring more affordable housing into the city. Public engagement for this chapter included community meetings and surveys, as well as presentations of the chapter to the city's various advisory board and commissions in order to solicit feedback to further refine the draft chapter. And so that summarizes the staff report for the housing chapter. Go right into the demographics.
Can I ask a
anyone have any-
question
Sure.
before we move on to demographics? So just in light of comments that we've had and some of the conversation around stormwater management, where is it appropriate for us to begin to address, in terms of the vision for planning purposes, even at the residential level, issues around resiliency, things with the environment, and it touches on mature tree canopy, which is important, which is a stormwater mitigation. Where do we touch on that in terms of our vision to build a more resilient community and to be more focused on things preemptively as opposed to reactively?
The natural resources chapter that staff is currently working on would be a good place to touch on that further.
Great. When will we see that?
That is under development right now. We're going to have a briefing for council in September. So it's going to the Planning Commission on September 3rd and City Council on September 16th.
Great. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Duncan?
There was an update of language, right, that Mr. Snyder, I think, spearheaded, that was referred to. All I picked up was the packet that was sent out Thursday. Was there an update, like lines 158 through 61? Is that here somewhere?
So there was a third whereas statement added to the resolution. This is lines 158 to 163. And so this is bringing out that the comprehensive plan is intended to be general in nature and designed to guide and accomplish a coordinated, adjusted, and harmonious development of the city. So noting that it's supposed to be a general framework for achieving the city's vision.
So that language that's not in my 158 through 63. That's because I have a older copy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that language is what we're going to be voting on, right? And is that satisfactory too?
Yes, it was sent out as a revised.
Right, I remember reading the email, but I didn't print it out, so I don't have it at hand. I thought it was good language, but I just want to make sure that's.
Yes, that's what's before council tonight.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, before we move on, anything else? Ms. Conley, Vice Mayor Conley?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to the staff that worked on this. Ms. Hardy and I sat down with them after our last conversation at City Council meeting, and they were very receptive to our comments and adjusted things and made a better product, so I do appreciate that. I have one question, page 22 of 29. One of the long-term strategies is utilize civic associations to increase social connectivity. And that says not until 2025 or later. I'm wondering if there's a way to change that or word that so we actually start doing that now and not wait 6 years.
Right.
Or is it a goal that we have it completed by then?
So the intent of that action is that the city will more proactively and intentionally use civic associations. Right now, there are a number of civic associations in the city, but there aren't necessarily civic associations available for every resident of the city. And so the intent here, again, is to more proactively and intentionally use those groups and have records of that information as well. And the fact that that is shown as a long-term action does not mean that it has to wait until 2025 to start on that. That's just the longer term.
Thank you. It does seem like something that there probably are some existing civic associations now that we could work with, and as others develop, add them onto the list. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Thank you, Mayor. I did want to make one point. In the section here that touched on permitting accessory dwelling units, page 17 of 29, I just want to recognize publicly, there were a number of emails, even some comments made in the Falls Church News Press about knee-jerk reaction to allowing or permitting or even zoning accessory dwelling units. But the spirit of this is just looking at additional options, right? Looking to more dynamic, broader opportunities to solve for the affordability crisis, and that anything in here that is a change, something that is worded as permitting accessory dwelling units may be another solution, is something that will be studied, whether it's parking, impact on public services. So I did want to recognize that in light of some of the comments that have made. I think I think there's some great solutions that are out there, some wonderful solutions that have been added here, but all things come with an additional study period before anything is zoning or zoned or permitted as a major change to our planning.
All right, thank you. Unless there's anything else, why don't we move on to the next phase? And there will be opportunity for the public to comment as well on both portions of this discussion.
Okay. So again, highlighting the staff report for the demographics chapter, the request is for council to hold a public hearing and consider adoption of TR 19-20, a resolution to update and replace the existing demographics chapter of the city's comprehensive plan, and staff recommends that city council adopt TR 19-20. City Council last saw this draft chapter at the July 15th joint work session with the Planning Commission. Following that joint work session, there were only some general formatting changes that were made to the chapter. On August 5th, 2019, the Planning Commission held a public hearing to consider the updates to the demographics chapter. And at that meeting, the Planning Commission voted unanimously in favor of the updated materials, but as part of that motion, they directed staff to make a few changes to the draft chapter. This included clarifying on page 15 that encouraging development of Class A office space would provide opportunities for higher wage jobs to locate within the city, and then adding an appendix that provides some additional background demographic data. Demographics information, of course, is central to many different aspects of planning, including public facilities, schools, parks, operating expenses, and infrastructure. And this chapter was last updated 13 years ago, and since that time, the city has seen significant changes, and so the update of this chapter is certainly timely. To get a better sense of where the city is, where the city will be in the future, and what may be needed to support the city's future population, the chapter is broken into 3 sections: trends, projections, and connections. The trends section highlights the sort of demographic trends the city has been experiencing. The projections section discusses what changes are anticipated, and then the connections section highlights how this data relates to day-to-day city operations. The public engagement strategy for this chapter was similar to that of the housing chapter. It included a community meeting on June 8th, as well as a survey that ran from the end of May until June 10th. And then in addition to that, city staff also presented the draft chapter to the city's boards and commissions to get further feedback. And that's all I have for the staff report, so I'm happy to open it up for discussion.
All right, thank you so much. Why don't we start with council discussion or council comments, and then we'll open it up to the public. Does any member of council have any either comments or questions? this portion of the comprehensive plan. Mr. Duncan?
Could I just ask one question? So on page 15, under the employment subhead, it says the median annual wage of employed Falls Church residents is $67,684. The median annual wage of Falls Church jobs is $38,412, which it says is notably lower than the wages of employed residents. So the jobs that are called Falls Church jobs are, include, you know, like the jobs at the school system, the jobs in the city hall, city staff, as well as private sector jobs?
Yes, all at-place jobs within the city.
Okay, so if a teacher happens to live in Falls Church, they double up there. I mean, they're counted as an employed person in the city, and they're counted as somebody with a Falls Church job.
Correct.
Okay. Just for future purposes, when we get our HR operation fully staffed up, I'd be curious to know where our city employment stands in terms of the compensation that we offer from, you know, the beginning levels all the way to the more advanced levels. You know, how are we doing as a city government at lifting up that $38,000 number, I guess is what I'm getting at. Are we underperforming in our efforts to compensate city employees, or are we performing at par with our peers in Northern Virginia? So that's just a question, not to answer tonight, obviously, but something that this document sets off for future discussion. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Are there other comments about this portion of the comprehensive plan? If not, I'm going to open it up to the public. I'm sorry, Vice Mayor Conley?
Ms. Schaefer, one question on this, on both of these. If we vote to approve them tonight, what are the next steps then with both of these plans?
From here, any final formatting would be done, and then the chapter would be adopted, and we would move forward with working on the actions that the housing chapter calls out.
Okay. And where will it be housed? So if people want to go back and refer to it, is the comprehensive plan on our website in a specific place,
Correct.
chapter by chapter?
As part of some updates to the city's website towards the end of last year, city staff had set up a planning library. So if you go to the planning library, you can access all of the chapters of the comprehensive plan.
Thank you.
Just, can I ask a process question? So thank you to the clerk for the language 158 through 163. The fact that we're on the housing chapter, the fact that we're incorporating that, does that require the planning commission to take this up again and agree with us, or is this okay for us to do?
The planning commission has recommended the plan. This is just part of your resolution, so I don't think it makes a change as to what they're recommending that you do.
Gotcha, okay, thanks.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to the public. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak to either of these portions of the comprehensive plan? See none, the matter is closed to the public. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt firstly the housing section, which is TR 19-21.
All right, and we're clear on the language, Madam Clerk and City Attorney? Okay, and do we have a second?
Second.
All right, unless there's any additional comment?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I would like to make a couple comments if I might. Thanks. So I want to thank everybody involved in this. This is quite a extensive effort. Just so that we all understand in terms of actions and feasibility that we have a lot of fundamental issues to address in our city. Public safety, education, physical infrastructure, which we've heard a lot about needing more investment, maintaining a tax that's at least comparable to jurisdictions of our size, and that remains an attractive value proposition for people here, and on and on and on. So I have long been committed to housing issues in the city. Having gotten my start with that, I supported a major development that was killed off as a political matter by another council. But I want it understood that we will be looking at all of these things, but they're going, at least from my standpoint, are going to be in the context of the other critical things that the city needs to do on behalf of the citizens that are here, as well as the citizens that we want to attract. So it does no good to attract more people here and fail to provide them the first-class services that they expect and the public safety that they expect, the education that they expect, the physical infrastructure they expect at a tax rate that's competitive and reflects true value for the amount paid. So I just want to make clear that I view this as in the context of these larger, in the context of others, not necessarily larger, but in the context of the other things that we have to do as a government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments, or should we move to a vote? Vice Mayor Connolly, you seconded the motion, so Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Yes. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
All right, do we have a motion on the second matter?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TR 19-20.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Any comment on this matter? All right, Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank all the folks who spent so much time pushing this over the finish line. This really was a community-wide effort, so thank you all. Greatly appreciated. Let's move on to the next item, which is, looks like a resolution. Is that right, or is it a first reading?
We have a first reading of an ordinance, TO 19-05. Ordinance, is that correct? Yes. Ordinance to amend Chapter 44 Vegetation and Chapter 48 Zoning of the City Code of the City of Falls Church to change the name of the Tree Commission to the Urban Forestry Commission.
All right, welcome.
Thank you.
What say you?
I don't have prepared remarks because this is really a very simple thing. So I'm asking you only to change the name of the Tree Commission to the Urban Forestry Commission. Tonight, I ask you to refer this ordinance to a second reading, but to refer the portion of it that refers to Chapter 48 first to the Planning Commission. Chapter 48 being the zoning code. The Planning Commission needs to rule on any changes before you make them final.
All right, do folks understand that? They're registering, all right. Are there any questions? Thank you very much. Thanks for coming out tonight and making yourself available for any questions. Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Lichtenhouse, no?
So from here forward, is this first reading or, yes?
This
so-
is just first reading, yes.
Okay, so after we pass this in September, on September 23rd, the moment after we pass it, heretofore, we will always call the Tree Commission the Urban Forestry Commission.
Correct.
And anyone who does not do so will have to put a quarter in the jar. And, you know, we're going to use that to buy snacks for the mayor or something, because I think it's going to be
Take
one.
more than that, my friend.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I think it's going to be one of the hardest things we've ever done to convince people that the Tree Commission is no longer the Tree Commission. It's commendable to do, but just, you know, let's use every possible communications channel to get that word out, because some people will wonder, you know, have they created a new group?
Right.
And that's not the case. Thanks.
All right, any other comments? I want to open this up to public comment. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak to this matter? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Do we have any other comment? We have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
All right.
Oh, motion to grant first reading to TO 19-05. Refer the amendment to Chapter 48 zoning to the Planning Commission for recommendation. Schedule a public hearing and second reading for September 23rd, 2019, and advertise the same according to law.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes?
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
All right, thank you, and thank you for coming out. We greatly appreciate it. Your fine work. All right, let's move on. Let's keep going. We're on to the consent agenda. We're on to the consent agenda now? Okay, looks like the consent agenda is fairly minor or fairly small, but does anyone wish to remove any item from the consent agenda? If not, Mr. Shields?
Just one thing I would note on the consent agenda, one of them is the council's ratification of the declaration of a local emergency with respect to the flooding of July 8th, which we discussed earlier in tonight's meeting. What this ratification really does is give that declaration of local emergency the full force of law and allows the city to work with the Commonwealth of Virginia and the federal government to seek reimbursement to the city for expenditures made to take care of public damage that happened. For individuals getting assistance for private damage, that the Small Business Administration loans that were described earlier in this meeting is the only opportunity for that. And again, the thresholds for that are going to be very high. This really is to help the city get reimbursement for expenditures made to repair streets, parks, and public facilities. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, quick question for the city attorney. Do we need to move separately on this because of federal law? I'm thinking maybe just out of an abundance of caution, we should move these two consent items separately.
I'll certainly defer
Whatever
to.
you think.
I'm not aware of a requirement, but it can't hurt.
Okay.
All right, so let's go ahead and we'll do them separately. Do we have a motion?
I'd like to move TR 19-27, move approval.
All right, do we have a second?
Second?
Is there any comment, public comment from anyone? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Madam Clerk, will you call roll on this matter?
Yes. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes?
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank
All right,
you.
let's not forget about Stacy
Right.
Evers.
I'd like to move the appointment of Stacy Evers to the Environmental Sustainability Council.
All right, and do we have a second?
Second?
All right, we've got a motion and a second. Any public comment? Seeing none, Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's keep going.
Mayor, there are two items on other business, the last two items on tonight's agenda. The first is a report on the General Assembly legislative update, and the second is an update on the council work plan. So the first item, we're very delighted that Peter Ferragasso is an intern with the City of Falls Church over the summer. Will provide the City Council with the update on the General Assembly. And I think we should also just note for the public that Peter is joined here by his family to add the pressure on him for this presentation. But Cindy, if you'd like to introduce Peter a little bit more fully and this item. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my honor to do that, Council. Before I do the introduction, I just want to set the stage for what we intend to do this evening. As Council will recall, you've requested for a legislative post-session briefing, and for the last 3 years, we haven't been able to do that due to my job share with the HR Director duties, but we had an intern this summer that allowed us to get back on track and provide this report for you this evening. So this evening, no council action is requested, but we are looking for your input as we proceed towards the November deferred special General Assembly on gun violence and legislation, and then also the 2020 General Assembly session. So I'm not going to do the details because I'm going to defer that to the person who actually did the research, which is Peter, who is standing to my left. He joined us for 5 weeks this summer. He is a rising junior at William & Mary. And he had the opportunity to do a diverse number of projects, this one probably being the biggest in terms of the heavy lift of research. But he was involved with energy data input and analysis to help us compare City Hall's energy usage from 2007, which was the last time, April, May, we were in the building, to our first 2 months here, both for electricity and natural gas. And we are seeing some positive signs of savings, so we will be looking forward to, you guys need to take the pictures once Peter's up here, not me. You better be smiling. And so that was one big project. He also pulled together the VML nominations for staff to submit, which were successfully submitted today by the 5 p.m. deadline. Also had the opportunity to do all the data analysis and getting into one list all the names that came in as recommendations for the downtown park. So that was a great assistance to our communications director. And a few other small projects, but one of the most important things he did was he sat at the desk at the second floor East Wing lobby and had an opportunity to observe patterns of new citizens coming in, what kind of wayfinding issues and questions they have for signage, but also to learn the variety of services we offer and how to assist citizens. So I think in 5 weeks, he had a great opportunity to really get grounded in local government to balance out that state and federal experience. He needed some local. So for this evening, the big project he worked on was the legislative research. Over 3,000 bills were submitted in the General Assembly, as you know. A lot of matched council's priorities in your adopted legislative program. So Peter took the time to look at your legislative program, look at what passed and didn't pass through the General Assembly's listserv, and also looked at VML's reporting so he could track and consolidate that into only a 17-page document before you. It's the highlights, but it's very valuable, and I've asked him to share a few key points, and then we'd be open for questions and comments. And as I turn it over to Peter, I will note that the General Assembly is going to reconvene November 18th for gun violence legislation, and the Crime Commission will be meeting in August. And so I've been working with the Northern Virginia legislative liaisons, tracking what will happen then and where we can have some input. This will be the first time that they'll consider all the bills that were in the special assembly with expert testimony. All the bill sponsors will be presenting, and they're going to do 3 hours of public comment. With that, Peter, some highlights.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Pleasure to be here. That was a very good introduction. So hopefully you get a lot of use out of this report that I've had the pleasure of creating for you guys. But I just have a couple really important kind of bills and topics that were touched on. That's all in the report. But the first one being the smoking in amphitheaters and concerts. A bill was passed that allowed localities to create laws banning smoking in these two public places, which align pretty well with the city's priorities because cigarettes and smoking cause health and trash problems in these public places. The second was pretty important considering the environment and how localities fit into solving the environmental crisis. And one of the bills that was probably one of the most important, was dubbed the Solar Freedom Bill. And so going off of the Sierra Club's Chesapeake Bay website as outside research, there were a whole bunch of possible things that this bill would have done. But just some of them were removing the 1% cap on net metered solar, allowing local governments to install solar facilities of up to 5 megawatts on government-owned property and use the electricity for nearby government-owned buildings. So this could be used in locations such as closed landfills and allow governments to transport that power to buildings that are actively in use. And another thing would be allowing the owner of a multi-family residential building to install a solar facility on the building or surrounding property and sell the output directly to the tenants, which would quickly facilitate a transition to clean energy by creating incentives for private citizens to invest in these clean energy practices. And one of the main takeaways from this, which I'm not sure how clear was set out in the bill, but it was focusing on distributed solar versus a concentrated solar approach, such as solar farms, which oftentimes require intensive land use and clearing of wilderness and forests, which kind of defeats the purpose of having a green effort. So distributed solar is integrating solar panels and therefore power directly into our communities in places such as parking lots, rooftops, and old landfills, which is a less radical method, such as massive solar farms, of course. But this bill failed.
So I'm sorry, just to stop you for a second. So that bill did not pass?
It did not pass.
And what was it seeking to do? I mean, I know I sort of get big picture what it was seeking to do, but what specifically was it trying to do in terms of spread out the solar output, et cetera? Could you maybe describe a little bit of some of the?
It was trying to reduce the amount of restrictions that public citizens and local governments themselves have to go through in order to buy in and to invest in a lot of these clean energy solutions, such as the 1% cap on net metered. That tends to negatively impact planning and creates a lot of uncertainty, which makes it harder for citizens who are trying to invest in this to get funding in order to do this. So the bill would have allowed people to do certain things such as this.
All right, thanks.
Well, hold on, a follow-up question. So
Yeah, of course.
In your opinion, or from what you saw, why did that fail? Politics.
Opinionated, yeah. Politics. I would assume, going out on a limb, that some people would prefer alternate forms of energy. But I'm a fan of solar, in my honest opinion.
Very political answer. You are a government major, aren't you?
My third key takeaway is housing discrimination. So based off your legislative program, it was brought to my attention that housing discrimination is rampant in Falls Church, the city, and in a plethora of ways. And so I was looking through these databases, and I saw that several bills were actually proposed combating these direct types of discrimination that were addressed in your legislative program. So the City of Falls Church vigorously supports fair housing, but so these several bills attempted to address, first of all, overall discrimination by race, color, religion, national origin, sex, elderliness, familial status, or handicap. 2, discrimination based on gender identity or sexual orientation. Or 3, which is the one you guys mentioned, discrimination based off sources of income, specifically where potential residents are turned away only because of their status as rental assistance subsidy vouchers. So every one of these bills failed. So it was heard, and they did not go through. But these bills specifically addressed these things.
Just out of curiosity, did these bills fail in committee, or was it a full vote, like along party lines, basically?
I have, let me tell you, give me one sec, page 6. Some of them failed. Others, like HB 1645, were left in general laws. And several others, based off what I have written in the report, 2 were left in general laws, and the rest just failed.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And my fourth big thing is the July special session. In the wake of the Virginia Beach municipal shooting, Governor Northam called a special session of the General Assembly in order to address the ongoing plague of gun violence that has impacted communities all around the state. Many of these bills addressing this problem were put forward, but the legislature voted to adjourn 90 minutes into the session until November 18th. But regardless of the outcome, several of these bills have the potential to come back, so they're important to look at. So I've taken the liberty to, there were many bills, but I've picked out some of, with the help of Mrs. Mester, some of those that are most pertinent to the City of Falls Church, and they are in there. But if I could just highlight some right now, I think one of the most important would have been prohibiting the possession of firearms or other projectile weapons, along with ammunition or attachments for firearms in any building owned or used by a locality within the Commonwealth. Currently, firearms are prohibited in courthouses only, and the penalty is a Class 1 misdemeanor. This bill would expand this prohibition to all government buildings and increases the penalty to a Class 6 felony. This bill was stricken at the request of the patron in the courts of justice. And another one is SB 4001, which would allow a locality to adopt an ordinance that prohibits firearms, ammunition, or components or a combination thereof at any regular or special meeting of its local government body, provided that notice of such prohibition is publicly posted and the meeting room is owned or operated by the locality. This was tabled in militia, police, and public safety. And lastly, HB 4007 would authorize the locality to adopt an ordinance prohibiting firearms, ammunition, or components or combination thereof in any building owned or used by such locality for government purposes. Such ordinance must include a provision for security measures designed to reasonably prevent unauthorized access of such building by a person with a firearm, ammunition, or components or combination thereof. Locality must post notice of this prohibition. This was tabled in Militia, Police, and Public Safety. So there were many other bills, but we will get more information come the 19th and the 20th when the Crime Commission convenes.
All right, thanks.
Can I-
So we have a question or two?
Sure. So I know we've long supported the ability of local governments to prevent carrying firearms on public property, and that's, of course, been blocked at the state level. So it's interesting to see those back. Fully would support that. The issue of assault weapons, were there any bills introduced to ban or buy back assault weapons?
HB 4021 expands the definition of an assault firearm and prohibits any person from importing, selling, transferring, manufacturing, purchasing, possessing, or transporting an assault firearm. A violation is a Class 6 felony. So, yes, and I'm sure there were several other bills.
What's your best guess about which of these bills are coming back? And by the way, I would strongly support that one as well. When do you think these bills will come? Did you say there'll be another session in November?
Well, the General Assembly will reconvene on the 18th of November, but
And during the Crime Commission meeting, the bill patrons for all of the bills that were introduced, including the governor's, will be reviewed August 18th through the 20th. My understanding is some of the governor's bills have been improved and clarifications that local governments seem to support, and those will be presented as well.
Are there other questions, comments? Vice Mayor Connolly?
I just want to say thank you for this. It's very thorough, and it was really helpful to be able to see all the things that were in our plan, actually see some answers to them. So thank you, I do appreciate that. Question on the Medicare waiver. That was something we were working on last year, regarding Miller House.
yes.
Is that the Medicaid waiver and the residency prioritization? So I know that Miller House has its first set of residents set to move in this month. I think someone has already moved in. And I'm just wondering what you think the next steps will be on that. This may be one for Ms. Mester. But
Since I worked that one.
because
through
what we'd
General
like to be
Assembly.
able to do is say, going forward, how do we change the requirements around that?
Yeah, as council will recall, we didn't actually get standalone legislation. It's just the budget amendment that the senator was able to get in behalf, and the language Nancy has left, but not as robust as we wanted. So I think council, one thing we would recommend is you have in your legislative program again, and we try to actually get state code legislation changed. It will take some work with the state department as well as our CSB to make sure that all parties feel comfortable with the prioritization.
So I would just ask that we really stay on top of that, because there are residents there now, and I'm assuming they're going to live there for a long time, so we probably have some time to work on this one. But I think it's important that we continue to address it. And then my other question is just about the fair housing. You say that we have frequent instances of voucher holders being turned away. And I'm wondering, that sounds like something we need to address too. And I know Nancy Vincent just left. I'm assuming she's the person that provided you with that information about.
Yeah, I was given that.
Yeah. But that seems like something we need to address as well.
Yeah, and that's why it was recommended and you adopted into the legislative program. Housing and Human Services did provide me that information. Our apartment complexes under state law, because income isn't a protected class, do not have to accept vouchers. So the majority of our apartment complexes do not. You accept one, you have to accept all, but by not accepting one, then our vouchers, the residents who have vouchers have a hard time finding places affordable in the city. So it remains.
And do we have any ability to change that, or we have to have the law change first?
Law has to change. It's not a local option.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure, let me go back to the money bills, if you will, because certainly a major challenge for localities is how you fund both transportation and stormwater. And I note that there was an effort, I think, to return some of the money that had been reallocated for metro funding, and I understand that bill failed. And I understand, though, that there's some funding possible for stormwater. So let me talk about what I'll call the money bills for a minute, both transportation and stormwater infrastructure. Tell me what you learned about both of those.
Let me do transportation. I'll turn it back over to Peter for stormwater. Made some progress with the transportation funding, but nothing significant. We really need to partner with our regional partners, and I know both MVTC and MVTA are looking at that to be in their legislative program again at the state level, but also at the federal level, because there's two federal bills out there that would be basically the PREA reauthorization that we need the federal money for WMATA. So I think those need to remain key focus areas for council's legislative program so we can work with our delegation. And in December, the TSDAC, which is a Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee, of which I represent VML, will be meeting again with DRPT for some economic and number analysis so we can tee up going back to the General Assembly to push transit funding as a whole, but in particular restoring MVTA's money back to the Northern Virginia region and funding it through the state. Needs to remain a key priority. And stormwater, Peter?
Stormwater, several bills were passed. And so probably one of the most important was addressing the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund. And so HB 1822 addressed the SLAF. It authorizes the Director of the Department of Environmental Quality to authorize grants from the Virginia Water Quality Improvement Fund for the installation of certain wastewater conveyance infrastructure. And along with that, SB 1400 authorizes any locality by ordinance to authorize contracts to provide loans for the initial acquisition and installation of stormwater management improvements with free and willing property owners of both existing properties and new construction. And this passed as well. So there's multiple bills that would help address a lot of the stormwater problems.
Thanks for that summary. So clearly, I know that'll be in our overall response.
Correct. So the stormwater staff is already looking at that to see how that it can impact with the watershed management plan and any incentives that Mr. Shields was commenting on earlier.
All right. Unless there's anything else, I want to thank you for an excellent job. That's quite impressive. And wish you the best of luck at William & Mary. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you around government circles in the not-too-distant future. But we'd love to come up and maybe get a photo with you if you'd like to join us, and maybe even your family as well, if they're interested in coming on up.
Family and girlfriend, did we lose Dad? Come on.
Uh,
Oh, there you are. Come on up, Dad. Come on. It's a family thing. We wouldn't have had this great resource without this support. All right. I'm coming up to you, Peter.
I've never seen such an attractive group.
All right. Good stuff. So, Mr. Shields, do you want to run us briefly through the work plan?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter and members of council. It is my pleasure to give the council an update on your council work plan. At your last meeting, Cindy gave you an update on the progress of the capital improvements program. And so we'll do the council work plan. And just as a reminder, The council, when it was newly, this council was newly elected back in February 2018. Paul Stoddard, our Director of Planning, helped lead a council retreat where you laid out some of your top goals that you wanted to see get accomplished over the 2-year period. And just as we say whenever we talk about the work plan is not the full enchilada of all the key things that the city is doing, but this is where the council really wanted to put its emphasis on how to move the city forward. And the big areas, just the groupings, were to make the city vibrant with placemaking and nice amenities where people can walk and enjoy the city. That was one big area. Economic development, growing the commercial tax base, a second big area. Addressing housing affordability, a third area. Improving our environmental resilience and sustainability, a fourth big area. The fifth area was a broad catch-all of promoting and enhancing our core governmental services. And then sixth was advancing the major capital projects. So let me give an update of these of progress in these 6 areas, and then touch on some of the places where we still need some attention and some work. So first, in the vibrancy and placemaking area, things that are in the work plan include things like our holiday lighting that we have in the downtown area, and our flower baskets and things like that. Those are projects that are ongoing. We were out on the street actually just last Friday, and we saw the watering truck go by to keep our flowers looking fresh in the downtown area. That's just one example. Bike share was delivered this spring, 2019, and is operational in the city. The wayfinding signs. This is to have a colorful and attractive and unified set of signs throughout our commercial districts to help people find key things they'll be looking for, including, for instance, public parking. And so I wanted to give an update on that. The EDA is spearheading that effort. Fraser and Associates has been hired by the city with using EDA funds to develop a wayfinding signage plan with location and sign concepts. We're going to have a kickoff of that contract in September, and the intent is to have planned delivery by the end of 2019. Touching on the other areas, the downtown plaza, we had our ribbon cutting back in June, and it is currently the new redesigned downtown plaza is heavily used by the community. The new park name will be formalized by the City Council in September. Also the alleyway that is between the downtown plaza and Hunan Cafe. The EDA has been working a lot with the downtown business community, but we are planning to close that alleyway off so that the pedestrian activities next to that downtown plaza can be expanded even further. And that will stay in private ownership, so we anticipate in the future that we'll have restaurant spaces and things like that happening where currently that little alleyway is. Downtown parking, we will have all of the city parking lots in that area between Washington Street and Maple Avenue in the downtown area. They'll be resurfaced, repaved, and restriped. That will be in the week of August 19th. So we're communicating right now with all the business owners about that. We wanted to get that done in August, which is a relatively quiet period, and get that work done before Labor Day. Big Chimneys Park. This is a project right in our downtown area to really enhance that park, make it more welcoming, more play equipment in that park. So we are right now in the process of finalizing the Centennial Construction, the construction contract with Centennial Construction, and we anticipate the construction will start in October 2019. As the council is aware, we have a budget of $1.3 million for that project. We are struggling actually to keep that project within that budget. We think we'll be able to do it, but I just want council to be aware of that. We may have some follow-up discussions. I'm hoping it won't be a problem, and that we'll just manage it within that $1.3 million budget. We're working very hard to do that. Touching down, I'm going to skip through a couple of things, but on economic development, the key big effort for the city was the West Falls Church project, getting it through the whole RFP process, the comprehensive agreement, and through entitlements. That was a huge area of work for the whole city, and we did execute our comprehensive agreement with the P.N. Hoffman, EYA, and Regency Centers team on June 12th, and the special exception entitlements were approved on July 8th. We anticipate that the site plan for that 10-acre site will be submitted around the end of the year or early next year. This West End small area plan is in the council work plan, and we did have a kickoff with stakeholders for the West End small area plan. This is basically everything west of the WNOD, all the way through the campus area that I just mentioned. So the kickoff with stakeholders occurred back on June 19th. We'll have an October community meeting, and going through our normal process for small area plans, we anticipate summer 2020 for adoption of that West End small area plan. In the areas of housing affordability, the council took a big step tonight with the adoption of the comprehensive plan chapter. That was on the council work plan. The council also took action on senior tax relief. That was in your work plan, both in the budget adoption where you increased the allocation for tax relief, and in the ordinance that was adopted on July 8th, which expands tax relief for seniors and other eligible population in the city. In the area of resilience and sustainability, the environmental sustainability plan I mentioned earlier tonight in response to a question from Councilmember Litkenhouse. That chapter to the comprehensive plan where we'll lay out our broad goals and objectives and also kind of have a data report out on where we are on environmental sustainability. The Planning Commission will take a look at that draft chapter on September 3rd, the City Council on September 16th. We anticipate that we'll have additional public meetings and survey work in October, and we're shooting for approval of that chapter before the end of this calendar year in 2019. The CPACE ordinance, developers are looking at that as a tool to help finance environmental and sustainable programs within their private developments. We are scheduling that for council consideration immediately after the completion of the comp plan chapter. We have great models from Arlington County, the city of Fredericksburg. There are some technical things we need to work through, but we think within the pace of the developers that are looking at that use, if we that CPACE ordinance, which basically just opens up additional financing for people to pay for enhanced environmental amenities or systems in their private development by using the city's tax collection authority, essentially having that financing be backed by a tax lien that makes that financing lower cost. That's the basic idea. The goal is to have that ready for council action in early 2020. In core governmental services, the CACT will be before the City Council at your next meeting on September 3rd. We'll discuss neighborhood traffic calming. We also want to discuss with council neighborhood sidewalks and other spot improvements for transportation improvements throughout the city. As the council will recall, $100,000 was dedicated in the 2020 budget for these spot improvements, and we'll provide a set of recommendations on how to allocate those funds, and the council will make the final, provide input on that. The major capital investments, the high school project proceeded on schedule, and the groundbreaking occurred on June 14th and is under construction right now. The City Hall, we had our opening in May and our dedication of this space in June 2019. We're still working on sort of final punch list things for this building. In the library project, we'll have a report to the City Council on the update for the library project. We're at 95% complete for our detailed designs, and we anticipate that final GMP will be before the guaranteed maximum price will be before the council in November 2019, and construction to commence in winter 2019 as well. I have noted to the council that we're struggling with costs on this project as well, and we're working very hard with our construction management team to get those costs within the bounds of what the council has looked at in the past. But we do know that the contractors, the subcontractors that are responding to sort of the initial round of bidding on the plans as they are right now, the plans are not complete, that the costs are going up. And so we've got hard work of sharpening our pencils on that project as well. So I just put that out as a marker, but we'll have a more detailed discussion of that in September. So those are some highlights, some areas where we do have additional work to do. For instance, in the on the core governmental services, on the council work plan is standing up an innovation task force. That's one that the high school project and West Falls Church project really put the big crunch on staff time, and so we did not advance that initiative, but we want to engage with council on that and getting that chartered and have a discussion about what we can accomplish on that. The city workforce believes very much in innovation. The community believes in innovation. We want to see if we can organize some of those efforts through that task force. That's a quick overview. I'd be happy to answer any questions the council has on the work plan and further discussion on it.
All right, thank you. You've been busy. We appreciate it. A lot of good stuff happening here in the city. Comments from various folks? Where are we going to start? Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Okay. Wyatt, cost increases, like across the board on everything. Are you seeing this as the new normal? It certainly feels like it from a private sector perspective. And do we need to be revisiting many of the projects that we have not firmed up pricing on? I know we've got the library in addition to other projects to try to get ahead of this. What are your thoughts?
The bidding environment is really tough, and it's true for all of our transportation projects, as well as the Big Chimneys Park, the library project, and the City Hall project. It's a big challenge. For the library project, what we'll talk about are how much of it relates directly to scope, how much of it relates directly to the construction bidding environment that we have right now. We want to give council insight as to how much of that increase is driven by those two areas. And then we just have to make decisions based on the best information that we have.
Is the feedback you're getting that a lot of the cost increase is coming more so from labor or material? I mean, I'm sure it's both because we've got tariffs, we've got changes in immigration policy now.
It's both. Labor is extremely tight, and particularly for skilled crafts, there is a lot of work, and you need really good general contractors who have great relationships with subs that have that pipeline of skilled crafts men and women to do this work. That's a huge challenge. And two, the uncertainty with respect to materials, steel tariffs, that type of thing. The way that bidding works, you have a guaranteed maximum price. So now what you see in bid packets, contractors are fighting hard in the contract documents to protect themselves against price increases that are related to trade issues. And we push back on that, but that's a big area of contractual negotiation that's happening right now.
That's kind of the new normal for us right now, we're dealing with those provisions.
Right.
Okay. All right. Other comments? Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. Just wonder where all of our work on the Fellows property falls into your grid here. Is that a major capital project or open space or?
So that is one of those items that was in the capital improvements program, so that was clearly a planned acquisition. But it was not specifically named at the council's retreat when you did that work to develop this work plan. But it does fit in that bigger picture. We obviously have development that's happening in the city. We have targeted areas in the city where we want more density. And at the same time, the council made it clear that let's protect the open space where we can as well. And the Fellows property, the largest undeveloped tract in the city, was that opportunity, and the council took it.
Okay, just, maybe you could find a place to put that in the revised grid so we don't, history long remembers.
Vice Mayor Conley.
Thanks, Mr. Shields. There's so much green on here. There's a lot that's been done, so thank you. It's nice to see it all in one place and think about it that way, because when you hear snippets here and here, it's nice to see it as a plan. You mentioned spot improvements that we're going to start to talk about upcoming after the CACT reports on neighborhood traffic calming. And I know some of those spot improvements are intersections that don't have ped heads and don't have crosswalks, and as we have more pedestrians and more cars, some of those intersections are becoming more dangerous. I just want to flag one more that a neighbor contacted me about, and that is the intersection of North Washington Street and Columbia, East and West Columbia. And I know there was just a transportation meeting. You may have talked about that in that meeting, but this neighbor was concerned just about how dangerous it is to cross that intersection. Would that be a spot improvement, or is that something from the Transportation Committee?
That's actually in the
bigger
CIP under transportation, and it's one of the ones we just spoke to the council work session on transportation for pursuing additional revenue sharing money, because the costs have come, no surprise, over budget, and we have a funding gap. But it is active in right-of-way acquisition right now.
So, and what is supposed to happen there? We can't hear you.
Yep, I turned it off. Crosswalks, pedestrian signals, replacing the traffic signals on their own mastheads because they're hanging off Dominion poles right now. That would be all four corners.
Okay, so if this person wants to find that out on her own, where do I direct her on the website?
It is under the CIP
on-
projects, and I believe it has its own webpage. You can
Okay.
also give the person my email, and I'll make sure we connect them with
Okay.
the staff.
That's great, thank you. And one of these things on here, it was the EDA and marketing. It says the EDA funded initiative marketing video is completed.
Yeah, so
Can we
that
see that?
video has been completed, and we now need to get it out there so the world can see it.
Okay.
But a lot of work went into that, and it's very attractive. Very
Oh,
nice.
good. So where's it going to go? On our website or out on social media?
We're working on how to promote it right now,
Okay.
but we want to get it out there.
That's great.
Yep.
And then my last question is just related to this room. What's the status on our getting new pictures on the walls? We talked about that in June.
So we have a group. Cindy, do you have the latest on that?
Yeah, the report that Corey has is she's drafted the public art policy in coordination with Humanities Council. That is in with the planning department for review from both a planning and a zoning perspective. The goal would be is to adopt that policy and bring it to council September, October timeframe, and then use the community process to select additional art and input as sort of the first pilot test of the new public art policy.
Thanks.
All right, other comments? I've got a couple briefly. One, again, as I mentioned a moment ago, to commend you. I personally have noticed numerous physical improvements in the city that I think really make a big difference, whether it's accessibility, crosswalks, new sidewalks, even just small portions of that. I think it makes a big difference. A question for you regarding the West End plan. In some ways, I think that actually informs transportation decisions that we're basically about to undertake right now around the 10-acre site. Has any thought been given to that? For example, like how additional density in sites adjacent to the 10 acres might impact the transportation improvements we're contemplating right now?
I think there's a direct connection with it, and so that stakeholders meeting, that was a meeting of a lot of the key property owners to have an initial consultation with them. And that initial meeting happened before the entitlements were granted for the West End project. And so, we wanted everybody around that project to know what was being contemplated, but also to comment on it and say, okay, well, how could we make it better? And how can we have the larger area, be coherent with what we're planning right around the 10-acre area? So, for instance, when we were talking about bicycle access to George Mason High School, we're doing great work in laying out how the bicycle lanes are going to work right on the 10 acres. What has to be done, though, is, okay, well, how are you going to bike to Haycock Road? That's where the West End plan can lay out good routes for that, and having those property owners be at the table. Federal Realty, for instance, was at the table to discuss that with it, and they're very enthusiastic about it. And so those are the things that should come out of this West End area plan.
I'm just concerned that the plan will come after we've already said the die will be cast for transportation improvements around the 10 acres. In other words, the tail may be wagging the dog, if that makes sense. In other words, we decide this is the configuration, it turns out, look, it doesn't work for my site. Shouldn't we be having those conversations essentially contemporaneously as opposed to sequentially?
Well, I would say that the immediate property owners around the 10-acre site have been consulted from the beginning. So they're aware of what we're doing. I think they like what we're doing. And so those conversations have been happening. But also, as the site plan for the 10-acre site is going to be submitted in December or January, the small area planning process, I think, will have really kind of evolved and ripened pretty nicely right when that site plan arrives. And so we'll use the time this fall to kind of advance the bigger picture thinking for the West End and then have it mesh in with the site plan.
Okay. I would like to, just along the same lines, encourage you and all of us to consider physically improving our downtown even more than we have so far. Because I think that park, that little pocket park, has just been great. I think the more we can do things like that to really create some buzz and excitement in our downtown, it's going to make it just a really fun place for people to hang out. And the more people that come into town, having a center for that is pretty exciting to me. And so whether it's working with our landscape, making our landscaping better down there. I know that's kind of hit or miss, where you have a place that's very nicely landscaped, the little tree pits, and other places it may not be so nice. I just think having a comprehensive plan for that. I know there's been discussion over the years for like a BID, business improvement district, but I think it's time to sort of try to elevate the bar just a little bit in terms of just the physical infrastructure and just make it really, really, really nice down there. But we're making some great progress, so I commend you for that.
And can I just spread some credit for that? Jim Snyder has really been, I think, working really well with the EDA and the EDC in particular to implement those ideas. Some of them are just opportunities that we can jump on, and then some of it's a much bigger planning effort. And the council set the tone with the downtown area plan, and that really did help energize the things that we're actually doing on the ground right now. That Plaza Park was identified in your small area plan, saying this needs to be a welcoming hub of activity, and now we're doing it. But the EDC of Councilmember Hardy and Councilmember Duncan are keeping a real close eye on these things. Bob Young, chairman of the EDA, they're working it very closely, and Alice Darga on Public Works, she's been our project manager for this, and Tara Puzin is getting the paving done. So everybody's working together with that shared vision. Let's make our downtown more walkable, a better place to be.
Sure, and I think there's plenty of compliments to spread around to many folks, but I would also share Mr. Lichtenhaus' concern, as I've done privately with you, about cost overruns.
Yeah.
We got to get our arms around it one way or the other, but we can't do business with every project we do costing a fair amount more than we figured it was going to cost, even a matter of months later. And I have mentioned this before, the idea of maybe hiring additional personnel with a construction management background in-house so that to give us even greater supervision or supervisory potential for our projects. And I suspect it would pay for itself, in terms of cost overruns that are sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think it can be a good investment to have some more additional construction management capacity in-house. And so I would just suggest to you to maybe consider that for your potential public works hires, is that we can bring more of that expertise in-house because it just seems like we're having a heck of a time getting our arms around it. Mr. Duncan?
Following up on the mayor's comments about beautification and such of downtown, I wonder, is this the time to ask where lives the range of, queries that you field from a variety of us about upkeep of the city in general? The trash cans needing to be emptied more often because we have more feet on the street throwing out trash. The old news boxes, some of which have been removed because they're no longer in use, some of which are still around. Grass growing up in what seems to be some netherworld between the public right-of-way and the privately owned strips. I mean, I feel like this group, particularly because we're all here on the ground a lot, are peppering city staff with questions of, dumpsters behind the shopping center at the West End, the Rite Aid lot, which was mowed, I noticed last week. Does that fit under, core government services? Does it fit under expansion of our beautification efforts? What suggestions do you have for us about how to pull all those things together and make sure that, we're not just spinning our wheels, but, you know what we're concerned about, and you're communicating that?
Well, I think it starts with the council making it a priority, and the staff has to, our commercial districts needed and still need attention, and we have to change as an organization to be able to provide that higher level of service. And it's a struggle. All change is a struggle, but I think we are making progress with it. The downtown area in particular is operating in many respects now like a virtual business improvement development, or business improvement district. It has a sustained source of funding using that share of the hotel transient occupancy tax. Ultimately, everything we do, it needs to be done in concert with the business community, because what we really want is for the business community to be our partner. If things are going to be nice there, it's because the business community demands that it be nice and views itself as having a big role in keeping it nice as well. And then we can do things really well in partnership. I think that's the spirit that we're trying to incorporate. It's not just City Hall doing it, it's the business community and City Hall working together to do things.
Okay, well, I would say I'm very high, and I think others are too, I'm very high in spirit, and I don't know how deep I am in pockets, and more importantly, how deep your pockets are as a city to do the things that we're asking you to do. So, I think we understand that. It's a resources question sometimes, but let's all keep our thinking hats on. In the Transportation Subcommittee meeting, there was talk about bike share, and, it costs $140,000 to run bike share. In the first phase, it seems like, we're making about $5,000 a month, so that's $60,000. So, can we up that so that it's basically a break-even proposition, and we can allocate other monies to some of these, small, very small, micro public works projects, but they really do, I think, communicate, as we've seen downtown, where you do something really nice, like the Pocket Park. It just changes people's attitudes about a place that before that was, an afterthought. And I'd like to see that happen all around town, particularly on some of the parts of town, not just my West End, but, I'm thinking of the Tenor Hill area, which is, I think we all have to be honest, was historically neglected. it is no longer neglected. It looks great there in some respects, still a little rough around the edges in some other respects. You know, when we start talking about scooters policy this fall, that's going to put more people hopefully on the streets. You know, let's try to capture some revenue out of that. I mean, there are other jurisdictions that are levying charges, you know, for administration of programs like that. Well, let's see what we're allowed to do by the state first, I guess, and then what it's practical for us to charge, honestly, to generate some revenue to help, you know, hire some of these. It may not even be staff people because they may be overextended. Maybe there's a SWAT team of people who are at the ready who can swoop in and mow grass and whack weeds and just do some of those really very basic government services that make people feel proud of, you know, a city because it's proud of itself. You know, it takes care of itself. Thanks.
All right, is there anything else in this matter? Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, thanks. Just on the stormwater and infrastructure, when will we hear a report back from you as to the progress that we're making on dealing with those issues?
Well, we will be giving monthly reports on this issue. You know, this is something, we've got the email addresses of the people who came to the town hall meeting. We want to stay in touch with them, provide them with regular updates. As I noted, in September is when we'll talk about this, the process for updating the watershed management plan. That's where the kind of the bigger effort's going to be. But we also have operational things. We'll provide people with updates on what we are doing with the resources that we have right now with our operating budget. And then some of these policy questions, you know, we want to grapple with them now. And you know, I think there's questions about the backflow devices and things like that, other incentives to try to help prevent inflow and infiltration in the sanitary system. We want to be talking about that in September.
Okay, thanks.
And take action immediately.
Okay, and thanks for your comment on the technology task force. I think we need to get that going. Thanks.
All right, unless there's anything else, why don't we move on to business not on the agenda? Any business not on the agenda? How about any standing regional committees, council liaison reports? All right.
Is this a liaison? The Economic Development Committee had scheduled a meeting at Ms. Hardy's sort of request. I mean, I'm for it too, for Monday next, when she returns from vacation, to discuss mostly, I think, the downtown activities, since you reported tonight that the downtown milling, paving, and striping will start that day. I'm not sure whether, well, I don't know, how do you feel? Can we have a short Economic Development Committee meeting Monday just to do a check-in on downtown projects and not just the paving, but other related things? How do you feel about that?
We can do that.
Okay, all right, then let's keep that on the agenda for Monday at 11 o'clock, wasn't it? Is that what we said? Okay, Monday at 10 o'clock. And find us a place, Oak Room probably. I noticed that the Railroad Avenue, sorry, this is an extension of, this is more council member comments, so I should stop.
All right, do we have any council member comments?
Thank you. I noticed that Railroad Avenue work started today, so that's good. Is that accurate? I mean,
That is good. It's good to have that work underway. There is one thing that's disappointing, and we wanted to do stormwater improvements as a part of that project. We did not get the easement that we need for that stormwater project. And we'll continue to work it, but we needed to have the paving go. We couldn't wait, and so that's an unresolved issue. So the neighborhood, I think, will be a little bit disappointed with that. We'll try to continue to work with that property owner.
Okay. Finally, the Fellows property. Anything to report about? I noticed the city attorney's note telling us that it's all signed, sealed, and done now. Anything you can say about plans to tear the house down?
So we are doing a couple things. One, we're working with groups that would deconstruct the property and save as much of it as can be saved. We also are having members of the Historical Commission just do a walkthrough so that there's, understanding what's in that house, and if anything can be saved, we will save it. But we do want to move forward quickly to take the house down as well as the small barn. You may notice we put no trespassing signs up on the property. It's not the look we want for that property, but we have to do it while the house and the barn are there. It's essentially kind of an attractive nuisance, and we need to warn people to stay away from it for now. But
Have you
we
been managed to keep Phil out of there since?
So initially, the council question was, will the house be taken down before Labor Day? We have worked with that to try to make that happen, but if we're going to have the deconstruction process, where we salvage everything that we can, it's not going to be down before Labor Day. But we're moving with all speed to have that house taken down.
Okay.
We'll then have the planning process for how the park will be used in the future. That will take a year. But we want it to be safe and people can walk through it at any rate once the house and the barn are taken down.
So the planning process for Fellows will begin in the fall and extend for a while. Okay, thanks.
All right, any other council member comments? We've got minutes here. I wonder who would be able to point out any small typographical errors in the minutes.
I looked at both, and they all looked perfect to me.
Well, then, the Vice Mayor and I agree that we move to adopt the minutes of the meeting of February 25th, 2019, as presented.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Madam Clerk?
Aye.
Oh, do we call the vote on these?
Well, I'll tell you, we always have this question whether we do. I think it's easier to
Okay,
just call
sure.
it than talk about whether we should or not.
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse? Yes. Mr. Snyder?
I abstain on that one because I wasn't present.
Okay,
I was at the
And
UN
Ma-
conference, I think.
sure. Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Did we both of them or just one of them?
The minutes of the meeting of Monday, March 25th, 2019, I move adoption with the correction on line 285 of "and" instead of "and," in the third word. I believe that's what we want to say, was not an arbitration provision.
Can you top that, Vice Mayor Conley?
No, I'll just second.
All right, we've got a motion, a second. Do we have a third? No, let's just go with that. You want to call the vote?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
And it carries 5-0. Thank you.
All right.
Move to adjourn.
All right, let's do it.